Hey, welcome everybody. How's everybody doing today?
What's going on?
Going well. Thank you guys for joining. We have some exciting stuff to discuss today. Going over some copyright utilities, music NFTs, metaverse concepts. Today, we have our two mentors, MrSkeletin and SirCheesly, very well known in the community. Topics to cover. Um, we will discuss what is a copyright, talk about NFT musics, um, and we are going to have a giveaway today. So please drop some questions in the comments, and you'll be drawn at the end of the show. So let's get to it. Who would like to answer? What is a copyright?
Okay, let me get started. I got a big rant about copyrights. It'll take a few minutes, but I want to start at the very beginning, like we did with starting at the beginning of how to mint. We're going to start at the beginning of what is copyright. So, Fig, great question. Copyright is a law that gives the owner of a work the right to say how other people can use it. So, copyright can be basically the terms and conditions, and they can be whatever you want. So, I could say the copyright is only myself and Fig is allowed to make a derivative of this work. Or I can say, once I've made a copyright, I'm allowed to do whatever I want, and anybody else can do whatever they want with it, as long as they don't make money off of it. Or I can say, my copywritten thing, once I've created it, anybody can do whatever they want, and anybody's allowed to make up to, but not over, $100,000. I can make those terms and conditions, and basically, when I sell it, somebody has to agree to it, and then it's carried over that same copyright to them. So, if somebody copies it without my permission after I've created it, then they've infringed on my copyright. So when this happens, the owner can sue for the amount that should have been paid. Mostly this is civil law and not under like the other kind of legal law, but people can go to prison or be fined or arrested for breaking copyright. So this is different country to country. Canadian laws are slightly different than American laws, which are slightly different than the laws in the UK or in different areas of Europe. But there's also agreements internationally between that it carries over wherever that copyright was originally created. So copyright was actually made back in the 18th century. There was a point in time when there was no reason to copyright anything because it was so hard to make a copy of it. If you wanted to make a copy of a book, you'd have to sit down with a pen and a paper, and you'd have to literally write out every other word of that book, which would take you days or months, depending on the length of it. And so that all changed when the printing press was made. Once there was a printing press and you set it, you could make one copy, or you could make 100 copies, or you could make 1,000 copies. And it didn't really take more effort to make 2,000 copies than it did 100. So that's why it was originally made. And then that has followed along with every technology since then. So at one point in time, it was so hard to copy a movie that there wasn't even laws around it. Then with, say, VHS, it became extremely easy for somebody to copy. Or with a camera, it became extremely easy to make a derivative work of it. So as far as who owns a copyright, when you make something, it becomes your intellectual property immediately. You don't have to tell anybody about it. You don't have to go to the post office or register it anywhere or set an application. You own the copyright once you've created it. So as soon as you are done drawing a picture or humming a tune to yourself or recording a stand-up set, you own the copyright to that. Now, you often do want to register things to make it more formal, and that just makes it easier to prove that you were the original creator of that work in court. Other sort of caveats about copyright are you can enter into legal agreements where you no longer own the copyright of your work as soon as you create it. So that happens a lot, especially with technology, where if I work for my company and I'm developing software all the time, part of my terms and conditions for working for them may be that they get the immediate transfer and ownership of any intellectual property that I make while I work for them. So even if it's on the weekend, even if I have a holiday and go to a different country, while I'm employed by them, it's possible that I've signed away my rights to any copyright of anything. Even if I work for a software company and I design a lawn sprinkler, they may, if I work for Boeing, Boeing may all of a sudden own that lawn sprinkler copyright. So as far
read
as
the
how
terms and
long
conditions.
Sorry?
Oh, I said always read the terms and conditions.
Yes, and so the terms and conditions are very arbitrary. They can be made up on the spot, and they can have very arbitrary. So I can say I want my copyright to last for 10 years instead of the standard 50 or 70, and then it just stops existing, and there's no copyright. It's then free and fair use. Creativity-wise, it's very interesting. Especially in the creative fields. And we're not even talking about NFTs yet, but for music, the copyright also exists within any small part of something. So that counts for, this was a big thing in the 90s with sampling. All of a sudden, you could copy somebody's music, and even if you only had 1 second of it, people were getting sued over a 1 second sample clip, or a 3 second clip that was modified to be pitched down or pitched up, or lengthened or shortened. People were still going to court for literally as small as 1 second worth of audio of a James Brown scream or something like that. And so, if I could keep going, I'll rant about NFTs and copyright. So, copyrights by default, as I mentioned, you own your creative work as soon as you start and finish it. So while I have Photoshop open and I'm making something, I own the copyright of that work. Now, different markets have different terms and conditions, as Dr. Cheesley mentioned, that different projects have different copyright as well. So Lightment, by default, they're completely non-custodial. They have nothing to do with your copyright. So if I make an original work and I sell it on Lightment, Lightment has nothing to do with the copyright of that work. And in fact, in the metadata section of Lightment, I can add my own copyright terms and conditions for the ownership of that work. So by default, I still own the work, even if Fig is to buy my design, which means because I own the copyright, but not the NFT, Fig is allowed to do what he'd like with that work within copyright restrictions. So that means he can print it out and put it in his private place of residence. But because I own the copyright still, by default, Fig cannot make a derivative work, and he cannot sell it. He can't remint that work. It doesn't mean that he technically can't. He could put that work back up on Lightmint himself after right-clicking and save as. But then I, as the copyright owner, can contact Lightmint and can ask them to take my Fig's derivative work back down.
Interesting.
Yeah, I really like that take on that, because it opens up opportunities, and it opens up the ability, especially when you're looking at the NFT space, using Lightment and that metadata function, to make those terms very clear so you're on the same page. I think that's a very underutilized piece there, but I like that you're mentioning that, MrSkeletin. I think that's really important for people to understand if they're new or if they've been on the platform for a while. Because I mean, I've been on for a while, and even some of this stuff, it's still new to me. The Lightment is a very feature-rich platform, and through these discussions, I think we're picking up a lot on some of these new. Well, I guess some of these features aren't new, but they've been around, and we just haven't known about them.
And there's all sorts of implications. So if I make an original work of art and I sell it as an NFT, by default, the person who's purchased that cannot put that on a t-shirt. They can't make that their book cover. They cannot go to a flea market with a poster of it and sell the NFT that they purchased from you. So they have quite limited rights in terms of reproduction and reselling and making a profit off of it. And a lot of people are unaware that they don't own any copyright by default after purchasing an NFT. Really, all that they own is metadata and sometimes the file itself, which is pointed to on IPFS in the case of Lightman. And so the big one that kind of came up a few weeks ago was there was a DAO, and I can't remember the name of the DAO, but they bought an original scrapped version of a Dune book. They put it together all their money. I can't remember how many millions of dollars they purchased by collecting and putting together everybody's money, but I think it was a few $1,000,000, and they purchased that original book. Their intention, as I've heard claimed at least on the internet, was then because they own the book, they planned on making each page an individual NFT, minting it and selling each page, destroying the book itself, and then making new intellectual property because they owned the book. What they found out after purchasing the book was that didn't mean that they owned anything to do with any Dune intellectual property or copyright. So they couldn't use the Dune name for any sort of promotions or anything. They couldn't make a new script for a movie. They couldn't make a Dune poster or anything like that. All that they actually owned after purchasing that book was the book itself, which they're free to do with. They can bury it underground. They can read it if they want, but they can't monetize that book except for reselling or auctioning it off themselves.
Yeah, and people can find value in that as it is, but that's a very clear distinction. I could give you another example of that. For example, every once in a while, just go on eBay or going on other sites, I'll go and find some animation cells from some cartoons. Let's say, for example, Sonic the Hedgehog, right? Who doesn't love Dr. Robotnik? Well, I went on and I purchased an animation cell of Dr. Robotnik from one of the episodes. Great, I have that. It's in my house. It's hanging up on my wall. Does that mean that I own that frame of the cartoon when it's being played on television? No, I don't own that intellectual property. I just own the animation cell that happened to be printed and used in that production. It's a difference between who has the copyright or who created that work and who has those ownership rights versus, yeah, you may have that physical book. And I'm actually surprised with how much money they were raising in that scenario that nobody with legal background approached them and advised them against that strategy. But yeah, there's a difference between having something in your possession and actually having the intellectual property. It's a different set of rules and laws than just having something in your hands. So that's a very good point.
And so because it's so flexible that you're allowed to write your own terms and conditions with copyright, we've seen recently that there are a bunch of different NFT projects that have chosen to either use ready-made but non-default copyrights, or have gone ahead and created their own brand new copyright from scratch with their own terms and conditions. So right now I have pulled up an article about Bored Apes and CryptoPunks. So those are two of I'd say maybe they're the biggest NFT projects right now. And they have different copyrights than default. So Bored Apes, when you buy a Bored Ape NFT, you are also transferred the IP copyright of the individual NFT that you purchased. So what that means is once you buy a Bored Ape, you as the owner of that NFT could make a sweatshirt and sell it. You could add that character into a video game and be able to make a profit off of that. You can take that character and you can modify it however you want. You can put glasses on it and you can remint that and sell it. CryptoPunks is one of the other really big ones, and it is slightly stricter. So you're allowed to modify and make derivatives and stuff, but you are not allowed to make a profit off of your CryptoPunk after you've purchased it.
Wow. You know what? It's funny that you mentioned all this now because I stumbled upon another NFT project on another chain, and it had traits associated to it and one of them was IP traits, and that the value was true, and that means that I have the intellectual properties to that NFT. But I didn't know that I can modify it and reset and remint it as my liking because I have that specific NFT. I thought that I could just make it like a favicon and then put it as an icon for my website, if I wanted to. I didn't know IP actually gave you more rights than just repasting the original
Yeah,
format.
absolutely. So Blitmap, another NFT DAO project, is completely open. So it has no rights reserved. When they make their copyright, they actually say, we don't own the copyright to this. And they also say no one does. No one owns the copyright. So even if you've purchased it, you don't have more rights to that intellectual property than anyone else does. And that's commonly referred to as Creative Commons. So Creative Commons means there's no copyright and it can't be copywritten.
Okay. Huh. Good to know. That's
Yeah,
really
that's really interesting stuff. Yeah.
yeah, that's really important. So are there any IP NFTs on Lightman right now? Like that you know of?
Uh, um, there must be different ones, and so you can just paste that into the metadata. So I'm going to pull up real quick. Here was an interesting one that I came across called NFT license. So this is a pretty new NFT license, and so for example, this is the one that's used with CryptoKitties. So the CryptoKitties, you can use it for that copyright for personal and non-commercial use. And you can use your CryptoKitty for commercializing your own merchandise, provided you aren't earning more than 100,000 in revenue in each year from doing so. So that's extremely arbitrary. They've just written that as their own terms of services. They've created it. And so if I wanted, I could go into Lightmint, and when I mint, in the metadata, I can copy this copyright, which I'm looking at, and it has the definitions, the ownership, and the actual license to it, the restrictions that are written out, and I can paste this into the metadata. And that means that now my Lightmint created NFT no longer has the default copyright. It now is under the NFT license copyright.
That's really cool. Now I'm curious though. When you're copying a copyright, contract type of situation, like is there copyright on the copyright stuff, or is this too much of an inception? No, I understand.
No,
Terms
that's
and
quite
conditions. It's a
meta.
good baseline. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's copyrights aren't copywritten, but that's a
Exactly.
very meta question. Yeah.
I figured somebody was going to ask that, so I wanted to beat them to the chase here. But no, I think that's fantastic, and this is a great example of taking a look at contracts and taking a look at terms that you like out there, right? Because I mean, there's certain things maybe you like what's going on with the Bored Apes better than you do with the crypto punks. The nice part about when you're coming up with your own terms and your own conditions on how you want to operate your copyright is you can cherry pick the things that you like. Maybe you like that $100,000 arbitrary amount. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want it to be $1 million, but you have the ability to be flexible because this is your work. So you could do what you want with that. And taking a look at these examples, use them as guidance, use them as templates, and find what works best for you. I think that's a great example that you were showing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so even with the strictest copyright, and say a Disney-owned copywritten thing such as Mickey Mouse or Winnie the Pooh, there are exceptions to the copyright restrictions. And so that's what's called fair use. And so fair use is for using things such as education. So teachers are allowed to go to a photocopier and they're allowed to click copy and then have the photocopier spit out copies of a copywritten Disney work for the purposes of education. Another example would be SNL, Saturday Night Live. is allowed to use copywritten works or characters or concepts in their sketches as parody. You're allowed to, and that's another fair use example.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is true. You see a very strong community on YouTube with parody animations, parody videos, but that falls under fair use. They're not getting permission from Disney to make a funny cartoon about Mickey Mouse. This does fall under that parody category, and you'll see that clearly indicated too. You'll see in a lot of their titles. There's a clear indication that it is parody as well.
Yes, so parody is the big one, and then the other one is for non-profit educational purposes, and that gets a little muddy with YouTube with running commercials on your own video. So if you're dissecting the movie Parasite that just came out, you're allowed to show clips of it as long as it's for non-commercial educational use. Commercial use is different and not as wide and acceptable. They're just, as I've pulled up here, what constitutes, it's possible to monetize a video and it still be fair use, but it's less likely to be considered fair. And that's the same with NFTs or with other derivative works.
Yeah, and I did notice too in the chat, Bottoms Up Britches came up with a great little comment there about researching trademarks as well. I don't want to jump the gun if you're getting to trademarks in a second, but that is something to be mindful of too. I mean, even if you're trying to have your own parody of a name, pay attention to trademarks because that's a completely different set of rules there. Trademarks have much different restrictions.
Yeah, I want to ask a question because coming from, let's say, a new user perspective, somebody who's watching this to kind of dabble into NFTs and such, what would I have to do when minting an NFT to kind of capture my rights on my original work? And is there like a smooth process for somebody who knows nothing about laws in regards to copyrights and such?
Well, if you don't mind, I think really just from the get-go now, MrSkeletin, correct me if I'm wrong, but just from the fact that you have your own original art and you're going on there and minting it, by default, you're already protected under copyright laws as your own work. Now, it's when you want to start getting into different nuances and different changes outside of standard copyright, if you want to give somebody the right to have a little bit more flexibility and stuff, that's where I think your terms and conditions really come into play. But just as a newbie, if you're just going on there and you're minting your first NFT, you're protected under copyright law when that is your own original art. You're not protected, however, if you're taking some other original artwork, claiming it as your own and putting it out there. You're actually exposing yourself to a lot of trouble there. So it's different if it's your own original piece. And I think that's where a lot of new NFT artists need, can have that peace of mind. And the nice part about it is that it's on the blockchain. There's a lot of the evidence and proof that you need based on the timing of when this thing was minted. And you'll see, I guess this used to be a thing. It was called, the poor man's copyright law, and what they used to do for different things before the internet and before, email and stuff. People would actually, in a sealed envelope, send themselves the intellectual property that they wanted copyrighted rather than going through and filing, say, with the United States copyright. And they would have a postage stamp on that. And as long as it was sealed and they had that stamp, they sometimes, if they were making an argument as to who had the intellectual property first, as long as that envelope was sealed and they had the timestamp on that, that could actually help them have an advantage in one of those cases if they're making a claim against somebody else. Because maybe they came back 2 years later and said, no, I wrote this story. Well, here's a postmark stamped, sealed envelope with the story that you copied verbatim. And here's all the evidence that you need that this was written by, myself before you went and copied it and tried to publish that work on your own. So that, that there were other methods before the internet came into play. And now with blockchain, I think that adds an extra level of security and validation that maybe we didn't have back then when copyright could have been a little bit more fuzzy. So I think blockchain is adding an enhancement to protection to people that are putting out their artwork, not the opposite way. Just my opinion. I could be completely wrong.
No, I think that's totally correct, and it's very good evidence. So all these things end up, if you have money, they come down to court, and if you have any sort of evidence because blockchain is all timestamped. You can say, look, this was minted on March 5th, Saturday at 12:30 p.m. I'm the owner of this copyright, and the person who minted it on March 6th is going to have a very hard time proving that they were the actual original copyright owner.
Exactly.
So one thing that gets very interesting with copyright and NFTs, and specifically the interplanetary file system, IPFS, where these images are stored, is that the IPFS is immutable. Things can't be deleted from it. They continue to exist even when somebody doesn't want them to exist anymore. So if I was to copy a screenshot off the cover of a Disney book and go onto Lightmint and mint that, Disney or somebody else could file what's called a DMCA and say, this is obviously copywritten work. That is obviously Mario, or it's a Disney character, or that's just a picture of Brad Pitt from Getty Images. That's MrSkeletin's not the owner of that original artwork. The only thing Lightmint can do is keep their URLs from resolving to that picture. It still exists on IPFS, but they can sort of black hole it and make it so that it doesn't show up on the Lightmint website anymore. But if you know that IPFS hash, you could still publish that IPFS hash and save it, and it can't be destroyed despite being illegal and breaking copyright.
Sounds like blockchain is forever.
It's forever.
Yeah, IPFS is forever.
I love
That's
that.
really important. That's really important. Huh.
That's
Besides
really
it being immutable data, it's forever. Interesting.
Yeah. It does add to a lot of the you call it a weakness or call it a strength of these types of setups, but I think this is why so many people are going the direction of networks like Stellar in the first place, is because it's, when it's there, it's there. You can't just wipe it off the face of the earth like we could with with old methodologies before some of these networks have developed what they developed. It's impressive. It really is.
And so finally, the last sort of topic on NFT and copyrights I wanted to just mention a bit is derivative works. So that's works that are remixed. And remixed can mean if it could be audio that gets sampled and changed. It can be a picture that gets turned into another work of art. It could be a like a collage where you take works of art of others and put them together into your own unique creation. And the bar for what is a novel new derivative work is it just has to show its own creative novelty. And then that's decided at the end of the day in a court if it is novel enough. And context matters a lot. So if you just draw a mustache on the Mona Lisa, that's probably not novel enough to be your own copywritten derivative. However, the exact same Mona Lisa with a mustache drawn on top may be novel enough if it's in a collection of another 50 famous artwork pieces with mustaches on them as well, and you're an artist showing them in an exhibit. Then you've created your own copywritten work of the Mona Lisa with a mustache on it, and nobody else can photocopy or add a goatee to that picture, and they would break your copyright, not the copyright of the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, I think that context is really important. I like your distinction there. That's an excellent example. Having something standing on its own, maybe not necessarily meeting that criteria, but yeah, your collection example was spot on.
And SirCheesly, like how does this all copyright, IP, all this information we're learning today, how does that play a factor into the metaverse?
Well, when we start getting into the metaverse, I mean, and it's funny when we talk metaverse, it's such a such a loose concept. It could be a whole wide range of things, but really what we're trying to do in terms of the metaverse is a nice big virtual reality space where users are able to interact with each other and with computers and different individuals within this space. But for each of those things that are being interacted with, whether it's another person or if it's something computer, AI, anything like that, well, there's going to be some kind of visual aspect to it, right? I mean, that's it. And anything with visuals, we have to now pay attention to whether those visuals are under any type of copyright, trademark, anything along those lines that could be an infringement on intellectual property. So as we get into these vast metaverses with these countless different NPCs and different avatars and different buildings and posters and assets and different things. Okay, now we're opening up a whole new can of worms because now, uh, you think we run into enough copyright issues in the real world. Wait until you get into a completely virtual space where now I think intellectual property is going to be taken to the next level, and that's where I could see this being a little bit of an interesting point of debate, depending on which metaverse environment people end up gravitating to. Because I know there's a lot of competing metaverse spaces, and you see a lot of corporate organizations. Again, I have close friends and family in some of the biggest companies, internationally, and they're all thinking the same thing. We got to get into this metaverse, and then I ask which metaverse, but I can't get an answer out of any of them. So we'll see where they're going with this stuff. But the opportunities are limitless, but also the opportunities for people violating copyright laws is also limitless now. That's kind of my 2 cents on the matter.
Wow.
So I saw a question in the chat about collaboration. If
Oh,
two
yeah.
people create an NFT, who would technically own the copyrights? And technically, that falls under something called joint authorship. So if 2 people own it or create a work together, then 2 people expressly have to jointly exercise their rights to use it. So they both use it, have copyright. Even if one person does 70% of the work and one person does 30, it's a joint ownership. And that's the same with an organization of 100 people. If 100 people collaborate and create a work between all 100 of them, then 100 people jointly have the rights to that work.
Yeah,
So
'cause
it can
it's
get very
very
complicated
difficult.
very quickly.
Yeah, and it's very difficult if it wasn't that way. If you were trying to determine, okay, who put in 15.8%, who put in 20.5%, it'd be very hard to make a determination, and it's completely just, it would be very difficult to understand. So it's a lot easier with the way that current structure is that you're mentioning, just divvying up ownership based on anybody who collaborated on it, and that's. I think it's just out of, I guess, convenience, or whether that's just simplicity. And sometimes that's how a lot of these laws are written, for just making sure that it's simple enough that it can be executed without wasting too much time and spinning too many wheels. Because the last thing that would be is if it wasn't divvied up, again, over those 100 people or over those 2 people and determining ratios. Who would be making a lot more money off of that would be those lawyers to figure out who was spending what percentage of time. And those lawyers charge by the hour.
Huh. So in that case, like, would you recommend if they collaborate to make like a separate wallet where they both were key signers on it to kind of
Well, when
level?
it comes to collaborations, I mean, depending on the relationship that you have with the other artist, it could be pretty generic terms. If I'm working with, with, say, for example, Windy City, it's like, yeah, we'll just go 50-50. It doesn't matter. We'll have our own wallets. But if you're getting into something a little bit more ambitious with a collaborative project that's going to have a lot of individuals, a lot of moving parts, a lot of people putting in different amounts of effort and time, you may want more distinct terms. And that's where, again, having even very simplified written terms of agreement, it doesn't have to be the most formal thing in the world, doesn't always have to be notarized, but something in writing that establishes that understanding where, hey, we're building this video game, right? Cheesly's going to build this video game, and it's going to be, 90% of the time spent is going to be building this video game. Okay, now MrSkeletin, I'm going to need you to make this one character. That's going to take some time, but really, in the concept of the whole project, it's going to be 10% of the time spent. So we want to allocate whatever revenues or whatever rights or anything along those lines accordingly. But that would have to be agreed to in a written format, in a written agreement. Other than that, it's just going to be assumed that it's a split between the people that worked on that project. So if you want to have anything that varies from just the norm and from the simple method, you have to have those terms in agreements and in writing typically. So that's kind of the direction you would want to go in those caveat examples.
And it can be just written on a napkin. It doesn't have to be very formal. You can say on a napkin, MrSkeletin owns 10%, SirCheesly owns 90, and that's become a contract. And after we've agreed to that, that's what it is. I own 10% of that work. Also, very interesting implications for specifically because we're in the JPEG DAO of decentralized autonomous organizations decentrally owning works that they create. So the entire organization may own it, or they can just arbitrarily, much like that napkin contract, just say each membership owns any arbitrary amount that the contract says that they own. So maybe it says decentralized members do not own it unless they participate for at least 3 hours a day. And then it's expressly they own a percentage after they've proven that they've worked on it for more than 3 hours a day for the course of 7 days. The copyright can really be that arbitrary that I can just make those kinds of terms and conditions up off the top of my head, and those are what the rules are for that work going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when there's an agreement in place, then there you go. Or if you're setting the ground rules, you can make them whatever you want. Certain things, if you're getting too crazy with it, where you have to have 3 Slurpees from 7-Eleven before posting something online. Okay, some of them can be a little too arbitrary and can get you it may not hold up well, but within reason, I think is always going to be the legal approach to look at that. It's a reasonableness. But you're right. You could effectively have any arbitrary terms and agreements that you want in there, and if all parties agree to that, then those are the rules.
Sounds really good.
Exciting for lawyers, absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds really good. So we have some questions for you, Mr. Chiz. Somebody asked, which metaverse on the blockchain interests you the most? Actually, this is for both of you guys.
Yeah, well, when it comes to the metaverse stuff on Stellar, Action Token is doing just way too much for me to even wrap my mind around at this point. I just really stumbled upon them over the past few weeks as they've been really pushing their social media campaigns and working with different projects. I know JPEG has been doing some stuff with Action, and Beer Token is working with them as well. But the idea that their metaverse is really getting at is one that's fascinating to me, because it's going to be that bridge between the real world no coiners or the people that are just slightly dabbling in crypto, to be that bridge between real world and getting them onto the Stellar network. And I think that's a very valuable thing for any project to do, is to be fun and familiar enough for anybody to pick it up and to join in on the fun, but then also be that first little rabbit hole for them to go down and then take a look at the things that they like on Stellar. Maybe they'll like the JPEG down. Maybe they'll like Nafulu Token. Maybe they'll like some of these other projects once they get into the Stellar network and they can find the stuff that they like. But having that gateway from a no coiner perspective into Stellar, and do that in a very fun metaverse environment like Action Token is working on right now. I mean, I think a lot of minds are going to be blown. It's such a cool concept. It's a very ambitious concept, but I know they've been working their tails off for quite a while, and now they're finally reaching that point where the stuff is out there. All these cool features are being added, and they're gonna make a splash. So yeah, that's where I'm thinking when it comes to metaverses in this network. And I'll leave it to MrSkeletin to put in his 2 cents. You have anything extra you want to add to that, or yeah?
Not much. No, I just stay in the metaverse. Don't have anything to say about it. I'm still on Second Life.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, I got really excited about a year or two ago from Decentraland, and that's actually how I ended up here. In Stellar. It was kind of like somehow got me in Stellar, and very interesting research that I did at that time.
It is,
Uh,
and when you look at networks like Stellar, because I know that was a question that I think was dropped in there at some point, was the profitability of different metaverse platforms on crypto blockchains. Well, my one drawback up to this point would have been these networks with these exorbitant gas fees, and to do anything costing you just hemorrhaging crypto and the time that it would take to process transactions. But when you look at a network like Stellar and how they're set up with their virtually zero fees, and how fast everything can be processed, this is the type of network that I think is really meant for metaverse projects, more so than what you're seeing on these high gas fee networks and things that could take forever because there's only 20 transactions per second that can be done. Yeah, I mean it's opening up opportunities and opening up a really bright future on at least on the Stellar network here for future metaverse projects, and I think starting with Action, I think that's really going to blaze that trail.
mm, Excited to
And
see what comes out.
yeah, I'll mention with, and this is the case with most online services. So this counts with YouTube and with Facebook, but also with Lightmint.com. It's in Lightmint.com's strong interest not to host copywritten, infracting works. It's they do not want to be people that are breaking copyright laws by hosting the work themselves. So YouTube, Google, DuckDuckGo, a search engine, or Lightmint.com, they have mechanisms for somebody to report, hey, there's copywritten work that you're hosting, and it should be taken down. So what YouTube will do is when they get that notice, they're not going to look into it. They're not going to get a private investigator and see, oh, well, somebody said it was copywritten, but the uploader said that it wasn't. Let's have a discussion about this and see who really was. We'll go to court. No, they just strike it down. They pull it, and then it's up to the original owner to say, hey, you pulled my work down just because somebody said it was copywritten, but it's not. It's my original work, and please put it back up. So they have a mechanism to get your work back up, but their first instinct, Lightmint's best interest and YouTube's best interest, to keep themselves out of any potential lawsuits, is to just pull that work down as soon as they're notified that it could be copywritten. And so you can use that maliciously by going on to Lightmint, going to a NFT, and then claiming that it's copywritten, and Lightmint will take it down. They will take your word for it that they are hosting copywritten work, and they will remove it from their site as quickly as they can. That's the same thing with YouTube and with Google Images, because they don't want to ever be accidentally hosting copywritten work.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it's a huge liability if they do end up hosting stuff. And the nice thing, and we've seen this in the past with Lightmint, where if I think we had one or two scenarios in the past where somebody was taking work from other artists from another blockchain, selling it as their own. I think a few people ended up buying the work and ended up losing money on that. But once it was identified and once they were notified, hey, this is not the work from the artist came out and said, this isn't my work. Lightmint took it down immediately. That there is a huge liability there for some of these platforms if they're not staying on top of things. Of course, you could always make the argument if their terms and conditions are cleared, like, hey, we're not responsible for any of this. I feel like that's kind of a cop out because there's always the chance that if the wrong stuff ends up on there, some of these marketplaces can be in a heap of trouble. At least Lightmint, I mean, they have a lot of integrity on that front. If there is anything that's legitimate copyright infringement, they are very quick to respond and look into it. So yeah, that is, I think, one thing that's building a lot of trust in the NFT space, where I think a lot of other marketplaces are currently lacking on other networks. So just it's just another reason why I think so many people are gravitating towards Lightmint.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
let's see here.
So we have
So
some
a whole lot of Yeah.
That's what I see here. Somebody wants to know. Can you tell us more about the board boating club?
Yeah, the board
Lot of
voting club. That's right. It was a nice project that was just an absolute just a fun project overall, right? I've seen so many offshoots of board everything, right? You got so many different types of ape projects, you got so many different types of crypto board things. I was looking around and going, has nobody ever done a board before? And here's my gauge, right? It's whenever I talk about a project that I want to do in the crypto space or in general, is I will run it by my wife, who is very much hard nosed corporate, just very much day to day technology project management, certified PMP. The first thing out of her mouth when I told her about this idea was, "That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard." That's all the blessing that I ever needed. Is
It's
if she could
perfect.
tell me that it is the dumbest thing she's ever heard, then let's try it. But it is really a project around just building a community one board at a time. It's kind of like you're building a house with just one piece of wood, and building that community. And it's a very slow and gradual process. I know it's not necessarily the rate that people like to see NFT projects go. A lot of them you'll see minting 100 different copies. Everybody will get their NFT all at the same time if they want to join or not. Boards are really more of a drip, one thing at a time. And then once they're in the club, they have just some really boring conversations. It is the complete opposite of what you would expect in any other Telegram chat. It is probably the least fun Telegram chat you will ever see. But at the end of the day, usually on a weekly basis, we'll have some great token projects take part and sponsor different different airdrops, and we'll get tokens from Nafulu's been fantastic. They've been really supportive of the board community because they just love the fun that they're having. So they'll send them some tokens. We'll get some different multi-mint collectibles on a weekly basis, whether it's from myself or from some other artists. I know Sean, Metal Crazy 22 there, he just did a nice piece of artwork that was dropped yesterday to the members. So it's really fun around absolute boredom. It's kind of a weird like oil and water type of separation there, and I think it's just captured lightning in a bottle in a fun way. But the nice part, what we're doing is keeping with boredom, is adding different elements like video games. And the video games take forever to make, but it's just one of one video games. You have a custom dungeon, and if you purchase the NFT, you get access to this video game. You could do with it as you want. You could keep the video game to yourself, or if you want it to go public and let anybody play it, you have that ability to do so. And it's up to the person who has the NFT. There's one for sale now. It's on auction. It'll be closed out on Monday is when that auction ends. But it's just a fun little video game. And as much as a little video game, it takes 40 plus hours to make one of these things. But it's a labor of love for sure. So yeah, that's the short response to what boards are. Absolutely boring. Hope you guys are still awake.
No, I'm actually excited about being bored. I quickly went to go check, and I'm like, none for sale. Gotta wait.
They're all on the auctions. That's the thing, is you're not going to get them for sale. It's all auction based.
That makes sense. Man, what a collection you got going here. Really interesting stuff. This is actually the first time I actually take a look at it in depth. I like number 10. It looks like Rick and Morty a little bit.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that was oak, actually. If you think of the
Professor Oak. There you go. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
you'll find a few wood puns in there. So yeah, get ready for some absolutely. If you think about it, you're like, son of a gun, like really driftwood, really.
I'll be splintering away.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, you're going to find a lot of fun projects popping up. I mean, there's a few that are now coming out there that are, really, kind of paying attention to what some of these projects like boards are doing. And now you're seeing some nice, adjustments into how people are building communities with their NFT projects. And I think it's fun because we're seeing that evolution of utility in NFTs rather than just your typical old mentality. And now it's adding a new dynamic. I think it's really exciting.
Do these give you like any kind of IPs and stuff like that?
That's something that right now it's standard copyright, but I as the creator of these boards, I would always be open to giving people more rights, but I would have to put that on the website as clear terms and conditions on who owns the boards. But yeah, it'd be fun to see people running around throwing them on T-shirts and stuff. I mean, they should have full rights to do that if they want, as long as they're not making more than $111,000.63. I'm gonna have to put an arbitrary number on there.
Yeah. So, and going back to how Mr. Skeleton was saying before, so you can mint something and the IP is listed, but then you could state something on somewhere stating that you do have these rights now.
Yeah, as the creator of any intellectual property, just as you could always supersede some other pre-existing documents, as long as you make that very clear that, hey, this is superseding prior thing. Because as the creator of that IP, again, you could make the rules, especially if you're the only person. It'd be a lot more difficult if it was a collaboration and there were two of you. Then you'd both have to agree and maybe have something more formal. But once you could put that out there, I think when you're giving people more rights to use your stuff, you can't just walk it back afterwards, though. I think that's the difference, is don't take rights away from people. I think you could always
Right.
grant them more rights, or be more flexible to say, yeah, I know this was the initial terms, but hey, you have it in writing from me. Go ahead and do that. And that's the one thing, too. Anything with copyright and anything with intellectual property, if you know who the creator is, always feel free to ask for permission from them and get that in writing if it's something outside the scope of what you would see in that standard agreement. Because as long as you get something in writing, say if Disney says, yeah, you know what, you could put Mickey Mouse into your video game, then great, you have it in writing, you got permission. Doesn't matter what that IP rule or that copyright rule was, you now have something in writing from the IP owner to do the thing that you wanted to do with it. So that's always the one workaround with intellectual property, is getting written permission from the person who holds that IP. So that's always a nice thing to note.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you for-
can. Sorry, SirCheesly's totally right. You can always pass the date, give more permissions to do things, and make the copyright more open, but you can't claw it back. So if SirCheesly put out boards as copy left, which meant there's no copyright, it's open to everyone, he can't then in 10 years go on Twitter and say, actually, I don't want anybody making any more derivatives of boards, and they're completely default copyright now. I want my copyright back. He can't do that. But he can in 10 years go on and say, actually, I want all of these into the free domain now, and I release them. I don't want to keep onto this copyright for the next 60 years, which I'd otherwise have. And he can make it less restrictive in that way. And in the same way, that permissions thing, if I have a copywritten work and a high school contacts me and say, hey, we want to make a play about MrSkeletin NFTs, I can say, yes, sure. Here's the terms and conditions. This high school is allowed to make a play, and then they're allowed to do whatever they want with it because I've given them permission. That doesn't mean that I've opened it up to all high schools. It doesn't mean that I've opened it up to anyone making a play. I've simply transferred the right to just that high school to make just that play with my.
That's right. And think of it when you see like the NFL, the MLB, the NBA stuff, you know how they have their little copyright disclaimer, but then when they say at the very end, unless you have express written consent from the NFL to then use the clips and use whatever, well, there's your workaround. Technically, you don't own the copyright, but if you got that express written permission, now you have the ability to use that for what was agreed to in writing. And I think that is definitely, again, with the high school example, it's very clear when you are the one asking, you are the one receiving the permission. Not, hey, I happen to be a guy in South Florida, because I got the okay to do it, that means everybody in South Florida can do it too. No. It's the person requesting the permission. So I think that's a very good example. With the high school doesn't mean all high schools. It just means the high school that asked for permission and got the approval.
That's a lot of wealth of information there. I was just thinking, like, in terms of how, I don't know if you guys seen that new movie, Free Guy, but they did something in the movie that I was like, huh, they used something from another company, obviously, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, and I was like, how did they manage to do that? And I went to go look at it real quick, and I don't see any connection to that company. Like, so they must have gotten consent to use it. Oh no,
Exactly. And you'll see things like if you think of the old what was that, like Pixels with Adam Sandler, how you had all these different video game IPs and all different things. Like they had to have a fun legal team go through and get permission to use all of those intellectual properties to be in that movie. And it's boy, that is a tall task, because now you're reaching out to all different IP owners to get all that approval. And I can imagine each of those terms were different. To probably have Pac-Man in there was going to cost more than having Frogger in there, or having Qbert in there or something, where they had to work out those different agreements.
huh? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then in the real world, there are interesting repercussions for breaking copyright. So if I were to draw Mickey Mouse and put it up in a poster in my garage, the cops aren't going to find that. I'm not going to jail because I've drawn a picture of Mickey Mouse. But if I put it in a movie with Adam Sandler, you can bet that Disney would make sure that they got paid the amount that they should have before the copyright was broken. So if I put something up that's copywritten on lightmint.com, if it sells for 5 cents and nobody ever sees it again, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound if no one's there? But if it becomes an immensely popular project, like something like a 70 million Beeple project, and I've used Nintendo works in it, then maybe 5 years later, if it comes up in the news and Nintendo sees, hey, that looks an awful lot like our Mario character,
Yeah.
you can bet their lawyers will come after me. So in the real world, it's really what's the benefit of somebody trying to stop you from breaking the copyright? Do they want it just to be taken down from a website, or do they want money that they think they're owed? And how much money do they think they're owed? And how worth it is it for them to pursue that copyright infringement?
Oh yeah, there's always a pro and con to weigh out. Is it worth spending the time and resources if somebody sold something that could be considered copyright infringement? They end up selling it for $20. Well, just for the lawyer to look at that for 5 minutes is going to cost the company $20. So at that point, it's moot. So it's. I'm not sure if you ever heard of the pig and hog theory. It's something that I guess is used more so in taxes when you look at different companies from CPA firms, and they'll go, well, this client, if they keep on doing too much, they're going to expose themselves to making so much where maybe the IRS is going to pull them more likely. I know that's not how the IRS works, or they don't want you to believe that's how that works, but that's more of the hog. They're past a certain weight. But as long as they're a pig and they're under that weight, or they're not, it's just not worth it to be pursued by the time it takes the time, the resources. So when you see some of these copyright infringements maybe scattered all over Lightmint or all over some of these other marketplaces, and they're selling for a few bucks, it's not going to be worth Disney's time. I mean, I can't tell you how many times you'll go to like the flea market or something, and you'll see a lot of Disney or Nickelodeon ripoffs and stuff, but they're selling them for like $1. Disney's not going to be going to the flea market in East Texas to go after the person at their stand because they're using Mickey Mouse on socks for $1. It's a understanding the materiality of what's being done. Because if they went after every single person that did copyright infringement, they would be perpetually in court forever. Now the lawyers would love that, but realistically, as a company, you can't operate that way. So they're going to go after the big movie deals, or the person that's selling something for $20,000. Yeah, no, that money belongs to Disney. You're using their copyrighted characters. So that's where that line is drawn. It's the pig and hog theory.
And another just good real life example is Andy Warhol, the artist. He was very interested in the concept of non-scarcity and creating derivative works from copywritten materials. So one of his projects was the Campbell Soup project, where he took a bunch of the Campbell Soup logos and made derivative paintings out of them. He didn't ask Campbell's for permission to do that, and it pretty clearly broke copyright and trademark law to just reproduce Campbell's logo as different colors. However, they were immensely popular works that sold for a lot, and Campbell's their stance was, hey, that's great. Now we have Campbell's Soup cans all over the place, looked at as high art. We love that. Keep going, Andy Warhol. And then
exactly.
But the same artist did the same thing with Marilyn Manson photos. And so he took photos that other photographers had taken of Marilyn Manson and changed the colors in them and made them paintings that he was selling for immense amounts of money again. And the photographers thought, hey, I basically did the work. I took the photo. That's my work. I want basically the money that you've made off of that because you've used my copywritten photos to commercially be successful. And so the photographers took Andy Warhol to court, and he basically conceded, yeah, I didn't ask your permission. This is really not derivative enough to be considered my own work. It's your photocopy, and you own the copyright. Instead of the court deciding, let's handle this out of court, and I'll give you an undisclosed amount of money, which was probably most of the money that he made on those. So the same concept, the same real art style and art works with two different brands or copyright owners and vastly different outcomes. So it really is every case is its own with the stakeholders and what they want to pursue and what they think they're owed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot more material to that one photographer than it would be to a main company like Campbell's, where they're looking at it from a marketing perspective in your example. And then the other person's like, that's my livelihood. I'm a photographer. Maybe I don't make a whole lot. Shoot, if I'm seeing all these paintings, everybody has it in their house. Like, yeah, I got to get paid for this. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a case by case basis for a lot of this stuff.
And it must have been way harder back in the past to get copyrighted and just go through this whole channels, right? Now you mint and you kind of have those copyrights.
That's right.
Wow.
And with scarcity as well. Like pre-digital, even I mentioned the printing press. It did still take paper and time and effort to make a second copy of a book or a third copy of a book. And that's non-scarcity, and those are physical objects. And that's the same with a real Xerox photocopy of something. It does take materials to make 10,000 copies of a poster. But with the non-scarcity, with the right click and save, that just doesn't exist. So it's so much easier. The barrier to break copyright is so small to be able to re-upload something onto YouTube or to mint something that's not yours or to download and perform or play a song that you don't own the copyright to at a concert. It's just there's no barrier at all to breaking copyright anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It really is a game changer now in the future with everything going on with blockchain. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of I think a lot more finality in what's what, having stuff documented on the blockchain. So yeah, it's we're going in a different direction, and it could be a good thing.
Yeah. All right, so we have a couple more questions before we wrap up. Also, just want to take this time to just any live questions, please ask. We'll go over the giveaway at the end of the show. Escanor asked in Discord, what if someone makes a cryptocurrency faking another currency's name and release?
So that would probably break the trademark of the previous cryptocurrency, depending on its terms and regulations. If there's none, then by default, that other cryptocurrency owns the trademark of their works, of their name, of their service and product. And as we've mentioned, they're free to pursue the takedown or the stopping the derivative or infringing cryptocurrency project, and they can pursue that to the extent that they are willing and able to.
Thank you. Jason Latcher asked in live chat, if you alter a copyrighted image, can you use it on an NFT? I think we touched on that, right? The mustache and the Mona Lisa. Randy Freeberg asks, so should we be copywriting everything we mint before we put it on Lightmint or any platform to sell it? Well, when you're sorry, go ahead.
By default, once you've created the work, before you even show it to anybody, before you've uploaded it or anything, you own that default copyright. So the only time you'd want to you'd really care about the minting process and copyright is that metadata and changing the copyright if you want it to be a non-default copyright. But by default, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to know anything about copyright. That's all taken care of for you. It's assumed by default that you own your intellectual property when you create it.
So when I mint my next blue mullet guy, I can put in the meta, transfer of ownership means that they can have IP, right? Intellectual property,
Yep.
and they can
And
do
you
as
could
they
define
want.
those exact terms in that metadata, and they can be as wacky as you want. You could say that $111,000 profit, then all of a sudden they have to pay you 10%, or any sort of bizarre terms and conditions you want. You can throw it in the metadata, and then that's what that copyright is going forward.
1 billion, right? uh, Next, we have Mr. T asked in the live chat, what are some great resources for creating a VR art gallery for stellar blockchain NFTs? Wanting to add utility to our series. That's
VR.
not
That
my scope.
Yeah, that is not something that I know too much about. I know there's a few tools that people have been using for different things. I like using Muse.com or I don't know if it's .com, but it's called Muse, but it's not, I don't think it's VR. It's just more so to wander around in a 3D space. So I'd be curious to see what other VR options are out there. And I think the longer that Stellar's out there, we're going to see a lot more VR capabilities with different projects.
Yeah, I mean, like I somehow stumbled across the other day while doing some research for school. There's these new AR glasses coming out. I forget the company's name, but it's kind of like the augmented reality where you can use your hands to type while using these headsets. That kind of looks like you're ready to start soldering something in construction. But this technology is always evolving, so kind of have to keep an eye
Oh,
out on
yeah.
what's available.
That's the future right there.
Yeah, can't wait to try those guys on and get a headache for like half an hour. Um, Arnav asked in the live chat, what about logos and graphics designs by freelance website? Who owns the copyright?
I think we want to
So
look at
all
the
those
terms first.
websites,
Yeah.
those
Go ahead, Mr.
websites will
Skeleton.
have very explicit terms and conditions to who owns the. They can all be individual, but it will be very express on each one of those. I'm going to assume almost all of them, you're also paying for the copyright of that work to do what you'd want, to make a derivative, to modify it in the future. And almost always, I'd assume any logo making companies, those would be part of the conditions expressly laid out on what you're actually purchasing, whether you're purchasing the copyright along with the work, or if you're just purchasing partial copyright of that work. But yeah, check the terms and conditions. Know what you're getting into when you're thinking that you're buying copyright.
Thank you. And everybody, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Gets us out there, reaches a broader audience.
Smash the
Also,
bell.
smash it. There's a bell. Wait, we have a bell.
Oh, I don't know.
We're gonna have to get one now. Um, next mention is JPEG members. The Dropster March has been distributed. Be sure to claim the OX1F3D4, other known as Mountain token, or the JPEG voucher, which is kind of what it really is, from your claimable balances. Don't swap them for Aqua. I went on the Stellar network and looked at the drop, and all I saw was like a whole bunch of people just hitting the swap button on the new Lobster feature and establishing a trust line, selling it for 7 Aqua, and then releasing their trust line. And I'm like, man, what a missed opportunity. They just kind of didn't even see it there, because if they established a trust line, it would have just gone straight to your wallet and you wouldn't have to do anything else. So just please note that. Um, So, in regards to today's giveaway, so today's giveaway prizes includes a NFT created by an NFT by, I don't have the name here. So, also don't miss LumenJack's and me talking about JPEG curation process on March 12th, next Saturday. Um, so, do we know who created this NFT? I haven't even seen it yet.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, it's a mystery. I'm sure I'll get that answer in 2 seconds. Um, and a contest for art selection is coming up. If you participate, mint your art on Lightment and submit it to our workshop competition. The NFT will be curated by JPEG DAO for 10,000 JPEG. So be prepared in March. And as a reminder, the first 50 applicants to the workshop will be sent their airdrop before the next workshop. So please be sure to check your claimable balances soon. All right. So, okay. So today's giveaway prizes is a JPEG Advent 10 NFT and a JPEG Advent 20 NFT. So we're giving away two NFTs that were minted by JPEG today.
Okay, so we got Jeff Boyardee and Seven Marilla. Okay, cool. So we got some cool artwork going out there.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna get to the Wheel of Fortune and start to spin it. Let's see. Okay. You guys all see my screen?
Yep. All right. Let's see who wins.
Man, we got quite a few people today. I'm excited for that. All right. So let's spin
Wheel
it.
of Morality. Turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we should learn.
Oh, this is a blank spot. Adam Wurzjak. Congratulations. You are the winner of the first drop. And now we go for the second. Let me get rid of that space because it's throwing off the odds over here.
Yeah, the blank space is bankrupt.
Nobody wins. It rolls over for the next week. Double down on next episode. Oh no. Lux, congratulations.
All right.
Awesome. All right. So, yeah, some good stuff today, guys. So we're getting ready to wrap up. And thank you everybody for coming today. Glad you could be a part. I'm gonna have to rewatch this episode on my own time to kind of digest all this copyright information because a lot was said today, and it was really appreciative that we went over all this information.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun. We'll catch up with everybody later on.
All right. Adios, amigos.